So thank you for tuning in today for this episode of the T-Spotlight. My name is Jessica Manning here on the T-Spot Daily, and I'm here with Greta Gustava, and what was your last name? How do you pronounce that?
Martela.
Okay. And and she is the co-founder of the Trans Lifeline, the suicide prevention line that is dedicated to trans people. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Why was suicide prevention a big issue for you as far as starting this project?
Well, so before I transitioned, I was somebody who had a lot of suicidality. Prior to my transition, I had 5 hospitalizations for suicidal ideation. And the 2 of those happened in like the last 3 months before I came out. So those last 2 times that I went to the hospital, I wasn't outwardly, like I wasn't dressing, I didn't look trans, but I was talking about my identity and talking about transness and was treated pretty awfully by the hospital. And this was in Berkeley, California, which is supposed to be the most liberal city in the United States. Mm-hmm. People jokingly refer to it as the People's Republic of Berkeley. But it made me realize that it doesn't matter where you are. You know, Berkeley's right across the bridge from San Francisco, which is where like gay rights kind of was born. Mm-hmm. And, well, I guess New York, but I mean, San Francisco has been a gay mecca forever. Mm-hmm. But it just doesn't, if you're trans, it doesn't really matter where you are. People haven't been prepared to deal with trans people in a respectful way. And so after my 5th hospitalization, still before I came out, I called the National Suicide Hotline, and I was trying to explain what was going on, which was, I was beginning to understand what transition would mean for me, and I was freaking out a little bit. And so I tried to talk to somebody about that on the National Lifeline, and it was a guy, it's this guy. And when I explained to him what transgender was, which I had to explain what transgender was, it was so clear he was freaked out. He was very uncomfortable with the whole concept. And that's not what I needed at that moment. You know, the call was supposed to be about me and my needs and keeping me alive. And here we are talking about dude's feelings about his gender or whatever. Like, I'm sorry that you're not comfortable with your own masculinity. That's not my problem. You know, I'm not here to tell you whether that makes you gay or not. Like, bro, that's just not what I'm here for. And so, that I went on with my transition, and I was doing all the things that you do when you transition. I was buying clothes and painting my nails and trying to work shit out with my job and, like really busy. Mm-hmm. And so after, I guess about 9 months into my transition, I was a software engineer at the time, and I was making buckets of money. So I was having a pretty easy transition. It wasn't like bad yet. So I took a volunteer position with an organization in San Francisco called TSF, and it's one of the oldest social organizations for trans people. And what TSF has done for pretty much since the 80s was they had an organization, they would do a dinner once a month, and trans women would come out, like their first time dressed in public, to this dinner so they could be with other trans women and feel like it was a safe space to be themselves. And I thought that was really cool, and I liked it. So I took a position with them, a volunteer position as a outreach coordinator. And what that meant is they had an 800 number that had been there since the 80s. And it would go straight to voicemail, and it was my job to return all the calls that came into the voicemail box. And so I started listening to these calls, and about half of them were crisis calls from all over the country. And so because of my experience with crisis, I felt like, well, okay, I know what to do. Mm-hmm. And so I started calling people back and talking to them about what their problems were and giving them advice and just basically trying to do whatever I could for people. And it didn't take me very long to realize that was the most important thing I was doing in my life, was making these phone calls. And I would say it was about 3 months after that, my wife Nina and I were, like I said, we're both software engineers. We're like, there must be some way to do this on the cheap. So we figured somebody had written some software for this. And so on a Sunday afternoon, we were Googling around looking for stuff, and we found this software called Pocket Hotline. It was something that somebody wrote in 2011 and had kind of abandoned. But Nina looked at it. Nina's the more talented technical person of the two of us. So Nina looked at it and said, "I can get this running," and we actually ended up contacting the guy who wrote it, a fella named Chap Ambrose, who, to his credit, we told him what we were doing, and he was just all in and helped us out. So I might, not all cis men, hashtag not all cis men, right? So he was really cool. He helped us get the software going, and then that was maybe September, and this coincided with me having kind of all of my surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
I had 3 surgeries in 3 months, and so I had a lot of free time. So I was online trying to train people to take crisis calls and trying to organize a nonprofit basically around this. We got the software going. I want to just say this. I went on Facebook and told my friends what I was trying to do and said I needed to raise $250 to get it started, or raise $100 to get it started because we needed to pay for the hosting costs. And we got $250 to start it. And so we went on for the next few months, September, October, November, till November. And we were trying to launch, and we would train these operators, but there were no calls coming in, so they would wander off, and we were just trying to get to a critical mass of people to take calls. And so it was November, Transgender Day of Remembrance, and we had actually kind of given up. We were getting ready to move to Sweden, surprisingly. We were interviewing for tech jobs in Stockholm. We thought that might be better for us because San Francisco was getting too expensive and Sweden was actually cheaper. And then it was Trans Day of Remembrance, and I just was like, I don't want to totally give up on this, so I'm going to make one last try. And so I emailed Katie Steinmetz at Time Magazine. I had her email because I helped her find some trans people for the Transgender Tipping Point article. Mm-hmm. And I told her what we were doing, and she wrote about it like half hour later on time.com. Nice. And then about 30 minutes after that, my cell phone started ringing with calls coming in. And I spent the next 3 days answering calls. At first we were getting about 8 calls a day, which I can't believe that was all. But it was really overwhelming because I was taking like 8 calls a day, which is a lot. And so we hurriedly started training people and saying, hey, calls are coming in, come back, to all the operators. And then let's just get these events in order. So then calls were coming in, and Nina had been paying for all of the phone calls on her credit card. So we had, I guess, spent about $1,600 over 3 months in phone bills. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get this money back for Nina because, she doesn't need to pay for that. So I put up a GoFundMe and said, hey, we want to pay Nina back for what she spent. And we raised $10,000 in like a week.
What?
And so we're like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. So we kept raising money, and I think we raised about $15,000 in December. Near the end of December, Leila Alcorn's suicide note went viral. And our number was reblogged on Tumblr 200,000 times. So we raised about another $15,000 in the beginning of January. So we started with about $30,000 in the bank. And we have just been going at it hard since then, trying to expand it, trying to improve coverage, trying to improve training, trying to have some political impact on the things that affect trans people with regards to suicide. So that was a year and a half ago, and that's pretty much all I've been doing since then.
Hey, that's a lot that you've been doing. I mean, I hate that, you went through these suicidal ideations and that, you had these suicide attempts, because I know that that's very common with trans people. I myself have had my experiences with suicide attempts and, just the overall constant thoughts of suicide, especially, with coming out and with,
Mm-hmm.
not being accepted by your family or your friends or your partners, stuff like that. It really does, It affects us. So it's really great to see someone, who's trans take that negative experience and then flip it around so it's something positive, especially something positive like this that's, really helping the whole community.
Right. I mean, I think that's what we are. I mean, I think trans people are doing this already, right? Because to be a trans person that's surviving, you're really fighting every day to against this kind of lack of acceptance and all the little clues you get. All day you get little clues if you're out in public that there's something wrong with you, and it is a struggle and a battle to combat that. I think with the suicide rate as high as it is in the trans community, I think it kind of behooves trans people to be more proactive about taking care of themselves, to understand that this is something that they're at high risk for, and to understand what are the things that would, trigger suicidal ideation, what are their triggers that are going to make things more difficult for them, and try to manage that so that like you would a chronic illness, try to manage your exposure to certain things. An example I like to give of this is I come from a big Mormon family, and when I first transitioned, everybody was giving me this advice: well, you can't cut off your ties with your family. Family's most important. Blah blah blah. And you know what? I did cut off ties with my family, and I am much happier since I did, because they were a constant source of misgendering and invalidation, which is very triggering if you're feeling suicidal. And so I think it's important that trans people give themselves permission to say, look, this person is, every time I talk to this person, I feel bad afterwards, so I'm just not going to talk to them anymore. I mean, I think we really have to do those sorts of things if we want to, survive this. In my personal life, I'm in Chicago now, Nina and I are, and we just moved into this last, February. We moved into a big house in Chicago with a bunch of other trans musicians. And so there's 5 trans people living here, and we have a basement where we can play music, and it's a little oasis from the rest of the world. And I feel like some of this is a survival strategy for me, right? To keep me happy and healthy.
Every once in a while you need to go, retreat back to your fortress of solitude.
Yeah, well, it's not a fortress of solitude because it's filled with, cute trans people. So it's a fortress of happiness or
like minds, maybe?
Or, yeah. So, I don't know. It's chosen family.
Mm-hmm.
What's funny is that we're in Chicago, there's, another trans house, a mile away. And so they have a party and we all go over there, or we have a party and they all come over here. So it's we're not even the only trans house in the neighborhood.
That is awesome. And I mean, especially with, that sense of community like that with other trans people close by, I know that really helps a lot of people really overcome these suicidal thoughts and stuff and really get through that kind of dark period of their transition.
I think the community can be, well, I mean, we know that there's actually science showing that connection to community is one of the protective factors for suicide. There's a trans suicide researcher. His name is Dr. Rai Testa. Mm-hmm. He's in Tennessee, and he did a study, and it showed that the things that protect trans people against suicide are community connectedness and pride and identity. And so those are really the 2 things you can do for yourself. He also showed that invalidation of identity is one of the strongest triggers for suicidal ideation. So if you have people in your life that don't respect your identity, you should really limit your contact with them when you're not feeling good. It's not good for you. If you struggle with ideation and you're trying to get through, limiting your contact with people that invalidate your identity is a way to help yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that also, knowing that gives you an opportunity to say to your family, do you know that this is the number one leading factor that leads to suicide for trans people? This is what you're doing to me right now. I think that, being informed about that gives you some power to engage with people. And not everybody's going to respect it, but I think a lot of people, if they understand how bad it is, some people will really make more of an effort. So
yeah, and I mean, even if they don't, it's still, you have that power to kind of start that conversation and kind of direct that conversation in a certain manner. And even if they don't really understand, because a lot of times, there are some families who just absolutely refuse to understand, that still gives you that moment of power whenever you're addressing this subject. Like, for instance, how you had to cut your family off because they wouldn't, adhere to the pronouns and they wouldn't stop misgendering you and stuff like that. I had that same sort of issue, except, I cut my family off too, but my family was supporting these bathroom bills here in Charlotte and stuff.
Oh, God.
And,
I'm sorry.
yeah, my mother was the worst about that. But, I mean, it's awesome that, I guess you're really giving people that hope. You're showing people that you can have this community, you can have this support, you can talk about these issues, and these issues don't have to be silent anymore. Because for a staggering number, like 41%, suicide is really silent whenever it comes to the community. Or any community.
I think it's something that we need to talk about. I think that when we hide that part of ourselves, we're really not helping ourselves or our community.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any way to solve it. I don't think that anybody else is going to solve this for us. I think all the answers to the problems that trans people have are going to come from the trans community. That's been the case in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that'll be the case in the future. So I think it's really just important that we take care of each other, and that we view this as our job and not somebody else's job. I know that as a community we don't have much. We struggle to find jobs. We struggle for acceptance. We struggle with our families. And, if there's one thing that I can say, I think it's really important that we don't do more damage to each other as part of the community, that those of us in the community, if you don't get along with somebody, don't talk to them, but don't, I don't know, there's a tendency in the community to shun people who have unpopular ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody can be trans, and of course there are going to be trans conservatives, and there are going to be trans liberals, and there are going to be trans people who have ridiculous, offensive opinions, but they're still part of us, whether we like it or not. So, if you don't get along with those people, that's fine. You don't have to interact with them. But I see these kind of campaigns on social media to shun this person or that person. You're really putting that person at risk for suicide. And if you're the kind of person who doesn't think that that's a problem, then you're not a good person. You're a bad person if you're not concerned about the suicide of somebody else, even if you don't agree with them. So that's something I think is important, that we moderate our speech to each other, that we realize that all of us are struggling with, everybody's got the same problems you do and maybe more problems, right? So, we should find ways to be kinder to each other as part of the community, I think.
Exactly. So how many calls have y'all had since you opened?
Okay, so I'm prepared for this. We have answered 12,732 calls overall. That's how many calls we've answered. People call us, because we have trouble with staffing, people call us 2, 3, or sometimes 4 times before they get through. But we do talk to 80% of the people that are calling in get through. That means that 20% of people are still not getting through, and we're trying everything we can to increase the number of operators. But the problem is, there's a few problems. Operators burn out pretty quickly, which is a problem on other hotlines as well. And then we get these spikes, like we had with HB2, we get these spikes in need. People, something terrible happens in society, and suddenly we have every trans person calling us. Mm-hmm. And, we were doing better when, before HB2 passed, we were answering a higher proportion of calls. And then after it, our traffic almost doubled. Yeah. Actually, we shared that. You probably saw it. We shared that statistic about our traffic doubling, and it became part of the political conversation around HB2, which I'm actually kind of proud about that. Yeah. That we were able to have an effect on the conversation.
Exactly, because, these kind of bills like House Bill 2, they really do accumulate like a body bag, especially, that's proven in your statistics because I think on April 13th, y'all had 357 calls.
It was 257, but yeah, that's like a ridiculous number of calls. Yeah.
Exactly. That is ridiculous. Go ahead.
I mean, this has been very much a Republican strategy this year to, I think the Republicans have made the very mature calculation that lots of people think trans folks are icky and that they can try to get their completely failing party a little breath of life by making people hate us. And I'm not going anywhere. And y'all are doomed. Y'all are the past. We're the future. So we're going to get through this. But it's rough for a lot of people right now. I mean, it's rough just to see it coming across your news feed. I was just looking at I was on Facebook, and my friend was posting about, I have a close friend, so I'm a veteran, so a lot of my friends are trans veterans, and I'm super liberal, like I'm very liberal, but most, or many trans veterans are more conservative than I am. And so some of my trans veteran friends have some pretty conservative friends. And I was just seeing one of my friends, a trans woman, she was complaining about her friends posting, these trans bathroom memes, in support of HB2. And just like how much that was distressing her. She's like, I'm just blocking y'all. And this is somebody who hadn't blocked people for a long time who were critical of trans people, but just, it gets overwhelming to have people, acting like your rights are something that they deserve to have an opinion about. Like, I don't think anybody but trans people have a right to an opinion on my rights. They're called rights. It's not an option. I use the bathroom like everybody else. I need somewhere to go. Believe me, you don't want to give me no place to use the bathroom. You think dogs are bad. So, I don't know. We've definitely had lots of reporters contacting us wanting to ask us about the HB2 increase. So I'm actually, I guess one silver lining is it has brought some light to the issue of suicide, which is important to us. And I think that HB2 ultimately, I mean, we know that it's going to be struck down. We know that it's not going to be supported. We know this is just a big political, I don't know what to say. It's just a stunt. It's a stunt. They're irrelevant and they want to stay relevant somehow. And so they know lots of cis men are secretly very afraid that if they like a trans woman, that makes them gay, and they figure they can use that for some mileage. I don't know. So.
Exactly, and irrelevant is a great word to describe Pat McCrory.
Yeah.
Tacky, tasteless, and irrelevant.
We're just waiting. I mean, we're just waiting for people who think those kinds of things to die. That's what society is doing. I don't think that, nobody, before the Republicans decided to make an issue about it, nobody was thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because it's not a problem.
Exactly.
Do I sometimes get looks when I go in to use the restroom? Yeah, sometimes. I'm 6'2", I get looks. I'm pretty sure any 6'2" tall woman would get looks going into the restroom because you're not used to seeing women that are 6'2". So, I don't, there's never been any issues. So.
Now, do you think that living in stealth plays any sort of role in suicidal thoughts?
Well, I don't have any proof, but I will tell you what I believe. I think that being closeted is difficult. And I think if you're stealth, you came out of the closet to transition, and then you went right back in the closet to be stealth. Mm-hmm. Now, I've had moments of wanting to be stealth in my life. Mm-hmm. I was actually considering, I'm just going to go stealth after this. And then Trans Lifeline took off, and now if you Google my name, there's Greta Gustava Martela, transgender, there's 30 pages of it. So stealth is no longer an option for me. But I see the appeal, and I definitely don't share my transgender status with people who I don't feel safe around. I don't volunteer it to people that seem weird or drunk or whatever, whatever other threatening category people fall into, right? So I do understand that probably one of the differences about being up here in the North versus being a trans person in the South is I think that a lot of trans folks in the South are living stealth because it would be much more difficult there to be out and proud. And so I think it's important to be mindful of not everybody has the good fortune to be somewhere where it's okay to be out and proud. We're actually preparing to come. We went to Asheville for the LGBT in the South conference this last, I don't know when that was, March?
Mm-hmm.
And we're preparing to come back through the South this fall because we realize that most people are finding out about us through social media, but if you're not out as trans on social media, we have a hard time reaching you. And so we're going to come through and try to hit some Pride celebrations and do some outreach this fall to the South to make sure that people are able to find us.
That's awesome. If y'all get a chance to stop through for Charlotte Pride, make sure to let me know because I definitely want to, stop by and see y'all then.
We would love to. We're trying to figure out the budget for it right now, and that's going to affect how long we're going to be out on our little tour. We've got a semi-reliable van that we will drive through the South, and we'll see how that goes.
Just watch out for those dirt roads in the South.
Yeah.
So, how exactly, as a trans person who has dealt with suicidal thoughts or suicide attempts, what is some advice that you would give to a person who is currently going through that situation? Like, what is some key advice about that kind of helped you through your situation?
Well, you have to talk to somebody about it. That's what works. On the hotline, we don't have any magic that we do. The thing about suicide is it's something that happens in isolation, and most people that are struggling with suicide are trying to save their own life. And it can be difficult to talk about the things that are bothering people that make them suicidal, but that is the most important thing, because when we're talking to people on the line who are going through a crisis, there's this moment when people finally say out loud what it is that's really getting to them. And, there's this release of tension, and people are usually okay after that. And I guess it's admitting to one other human out loud what it is that is really getting to you, and to have that person, listen and reflect back like the appropriate emotions. That's the part that's magical, and that's just, that humans are built for that. We're built to do that for each other. And so lots of trans people have a tendency to isolate. They become afraid to leave the house because they're harassed. So it's important that you spend time around people who are going to listen to you, who would be willing to go into that kind of an intimate discussion with you. That's really a survival strategy. And, that's one of the reasons that I live with 5 other trans people, is I don't have to pretend like I'm okay if I'm not okay. And people notice people that I live with will notice if I'm not okay, like, what's going on, how are you doing? And so I just think it's important. I think it's important to strategize for your own survival. I think it's important to build a life that supports your mental health. And I think it's important to understand that everybody's going through this. And this is something you can talk about. I like to tell trans folks, if you're already a trans person, there's no additional stigma that can accrue to you. Like, that's the most stigmatized identity. So we should be able to talk about suicide. There's stigma associated with suicide, but I mean, it's pretty much all of us in the trans community. I don't think that there's any reason to feel like it's something that you can't talk about. And I think if you do talk to the people around you, you'll find that for the most part, they're willing to go there with you and to try to help you. And if not, you can always call us.
So have you noticed any variations as far as to, like, what ages people are calling in and that sort of thing?
Well, I think that it's the tricky thing about trans people is that a lot of us go through a second adolescence when we come out.
Mhm.
And so I went through a lot of the experiences I had when I was 16 again, at 44. And so that, I think that tends to skew the numbers a little bit. There are some trans folks who are maybe older, who are established in a career and are able to just kind of transition and don't skip a beat. Um, and I think those folks generally are doing better than the rest of the community. If you're already making $200,000 a year and your company supports you and you just take 6 weeks off and come back and do your job. I mean, I know it's hard for those folks as well, but I think that if you're not dealing with, if you have access to a therapist and you have income and you have access to medical care, I think you're in much better shape than a lot of folks. I thought that was the category I would be in, but my career completely imploded when I transitioned because the tech world is so sexist, which I wasn't really prepared for that.
Yeah. That was one of the things that I noticed too, because I'm actually went to school for computer science with a focus on software development and big data. But that was one of the things that I realized too is I started my schooling pre-transition, and then midway I transitioned, but just the reactions and interactions with other people in the field just completely different, just from being male to being female.
I mean, it's tragic, and it makes me laugh a little bit and want to cry also, but you expect it to be transphobia. Nope, it's just plain old sexism.
Exactly.
I guess we could call it trans misogyny, but I really think that tech has a problem with women generally, so.
Exactly.
And then there's this kind of ironic, like, wow, you're really treating me like a woman, which is you're treating me like I don't matter, which is like yay, and also ouch, right? So
exactly, I think it's kind of cool though, because there are so many people who are transitioning in the STEM fields or whatever.
Yeah,
there are actually groups that are forming and companies that are forming that are just kind of based off of bringing in those trans people and making the company very trans-centered.
We're doing that. We have a company.
See?
Yeah, Nina started a company called Cupcake Systems.
Ooh, I love it.
Yeah. Well, so she got the name Cupcake Systems. We were talking about the name Cupcake Systems, and then she saw this article on Business Insider, and the name of the article was Cupcake Syndrome. And it was about how female tech founders tend to use cutesy products. That's why they don't get funded. And so we were weighing the name, and we saw that. And we're like, yeah, okay, it's Cupcake Systems, you bastards.
Well, who doesn't like cupcakes? I mean,
right? Well, and we're doing the first product is hotline software because. So what happened is we have this software that we're using for Trans Lifeline and realized we needed to replace it. Mm-hmm. Nina was at Google at that point, and we thought we were onto something with what we wanted to create for hotline software. But if she stayed at Google, they would own it. Mm-hmm. And so she left Google to write this software, which she is nearly done with. I think she's in the bedroom right now coding on it still. So that... Oh, do you have your puppy with you? I usually have my puppy. Is that a chihuahua?
Mm-hmm. It's my Cheech.
So distractible. So she thought she was onto something, so left Google so that she could own the software, and we're getting ready to launch that software. Will replace the software we're using at Trans Lifeline, hopefully sometime this year. So it's awesome. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool, especially since y'all have that background and programming and stuff. It's really cool that you get to take the hands-on approach and really make it work exactly how it needs to work, because how it needs to work. There's often that that barrier between the programmers and the actual users of the programs where they don't really know what needs to be done.
Right, and the nonprofit space has like software that looks like it's from the year 2000 still. Like they have some of the ugliest user interfaces I've ever seen. They just haven't. There's not a lot of money there, so they don't get all the latest updates. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of changes in how things should be done.
Mhm.
like the thinking and how things should have been done in the last 10 years, but some of these products are really stale. So we feel like it's a good space to be in, and it's a space where we're helping people by writing software. So,
Cool, cool.
yay.
So, since we've had this 41% number forever, and
Yeah,
obviously, you've experienced a ton of increased calls now that there are a ton of, well, since we're more visible to the public, there are a ton of, legal and opinions and everything else being directed at us. Do you
right.
think that 41% number needs to be reevaluated?
I think that number is going to be with us for a while. I think that so Dr. Testa that I was alluding to earlier thinks that for the overall population, it's probably closer to 33%. So the original 41% number came from a convenient sample, and so you can't take it as a. Do you know what that means? It didn't, they didn't get a proportional representation of demographically and all that. So it's a convenient sample, so it's maybe not the best, but 33% is what Dr. Testa is saying, and that seems super high. And other studies have shown higher and lower numbers, but they're all kind of roughly in the same order of magnitude of somewhere between a third and a half of trans people. So I don't think it's super important how accurate that number is. We know that it's pretty accurate because I don't know how many people in my social circles have died by suicide, but it's more than 5, right? Like, I have a pretty big social circle because lots of people know me, but, we're losing people all the time at an astounding rate. So it sounds right. Like, the number seems right. It's pretty rare for the general population to know somebody that's died by suicide, and that's because the general population has like a 1.5% attempt rate. So, and it's not rare in the trans community. I think most people, if you've been out for a while, you know somebody that's died by suicide. So, yeah, I think the number's powerful. I think numbers are powerful. I like numbers. But if you get caught up in like trying to validate exactly how accurate it is, that's useful academically, but it's not. It's too high. It's way too high, and it's going to continue to be way too high until there's some societal change. And so that's, to me, that's the kind of the takeaway from that.
If you had to point out, say, 3 issues that are the top issues that kind of lead to these suicidal thoughts for trans people, what would you say those 3 issues would be?
I mean, I think it's a little bit hard to tease it out like that. I think validation of identity in an intersectional way. I think that a lot of trans people are able to keep their job because their company's afraid of being sued, but they're harassed on the job and then nothing is done about it. It's kind of this malicious compliance. And we just had a case up here in, I think, either Minnesota or Wisconsin where a trans teacher, did you see this article? She was harassed. She died by suicide, but she was harassed by the other staff at the school for 10 years and was sending emails to the school administration saying, hey, I'm being harassed. Mm-hmm. And they ignored it until eventually, 10 years is a long time. So, I think that, if there was one thing that we could change that would make things better for trans people, I think it would probably be tackling the employment problem. I think if trans people are employed, that gives them more economic power. If you have economic power, you can do things like see a therapist, you can get regular medical care, you can create a safe space for yourself. So, trans people are way more likely to live in poverty. And so I really think it's the poverty that is more than any one thing that's getting to us. I feel like most trans people I know are the strongest people I know. So I don't think it's... But I think, all of these issues are related. If your identity was, it's hard to say, like, if your identity was respected universally, but you still couldn't get a job, would you be better? Or are you better off having a job but having your identity invalidated? Like, these are some, like, Zen philosophical questions more than, like, we need to tackle both of those things. I think basic respect is probably our biggest problem, but I want to see some progress on employment. Trans people deserve to live, they deserve to eat food, they deserve to sleep indoors. These are all things that people should expect.
Exactly. And I mean, 15% of trans people make under $10,000 annually.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when you look at, the minorities, like Black trans people, that's 35%. So.
Right, yeah, it's way too high. And, if we make a difference in trans employment, the people that are contributing to Trans Lifeline are overwhelmingly trans people who don't have money. And if we had some money, we could build these services for ourselves. Society really is supposed to be providing for us. We pay our taxes like everybody else. We should be having services that meet our needs. Mm-hmm. But at least if we all had jobs, we could take care of each other, And I think we are, that's the other thing is I think we are taking care of each other already. I know that there are trans folks in my immediate environment who are maybe unemployed and their friends are taking care of them, or underemployed, and the friends are taking them out to eat, and this is how we have always gotten by, and this is how we continue to get by. Mm-hmm. And it would be nice to not have to be part of this underground network of trans people taking care of each other, but I think that was part of the insight that I had starting Trans Lifeline, was that there were trans people who, when I came out immediately, just showed up and started taking care of me. And I think this is something the community has done for each other pretty much as long as there have been trans people, which is, arguably as long as there's been humans. So,
if you could speak to all the people that were calling in today and give them, one message of encouragement, what would it be?
It might seem like nobody cares about what happens to you, but that's just not the case. Mm-hmm. You have lots of trans siblings everywhere who care about you. You might be in a place where you feel stuck. There are lots of people out there that want to help you. Call us. We will do everything we can to try to get you some aid, and be a little bit patient. We will try to get you, help you find a solution to whatever it is that's going on for you. But it's not your fault. Things that are happening. It's not your fault that you're trans. It's not your fault the way that people treat trans people. You haven't done anything wrong. Just try to hang in there. And whatever you do, try not to isolate yourself. Try to make sure that there's one other person that you're staying in contact with.
I like that. Isolation is a big key, because a lot of times whenever you go into these down moods, you really tend to withdraw and isolate yourself.
Yeah, I think that's important. We really need to be looking out for each other, and to notice when somebody's not around and to be aware when people are having trouble, and to take it seriously when somebody's saying that they're having suicidal ideation. And it's small things make a big difference. One of the, when they study what works in suicide prevention, one of the most powerful things is when somebody does a crisis call, if you call them back a few days later and see how they're doing, that is the most effective thing. So if somebody calls you and tells you they're feeling bad, call them back in a couple of days and see how they're doing. That is super effective as far as limiting suicide.
Now, I know that, of course, we mentioned employment earlier. There's also the issues of sex work within the trans, community. Do you think that sex workers have a higher rate of suicide ideas or attempts?
I don't think so. I think sex work is work. I'm a sex-positive person, and I feel like people who are doing sex work are frequently in more dangerous situations than people who aren't. And I think that we need to be finding ways to support those people and keep them safe. I don't know that we have we don't ask people if that's what they're doing. So we maybe don't really know if people are doing sex work. I don't think there's a correlation. I think that a lot of times people that are doing sex work are, in many cases, doing better than people that aren't, because that's the work that's available. So I think that, And I think it also depends on how you feel about sex work. I know people who are doing sex work who are pretty clear in their head that there's nothing wrong with it. But I think if it's something that you're doing in a very, like, I come from a Mormon background, I think I would have a hard time doing that without feeling a lot of shame, just because of the messages I got growing up. I don't actually, intellectually think there's anything wrong with it, but I think I would have a difficult time emotionally doing it because of that upbringing. So it just really depends, who you are, how you grew up, and what you believe, right? So I think that it's probably harder to be in that position if you're somebody who is who still has trouble with shame from about sex, maybe from a religious background. So
yeah, and then of course we always have to remember we're trans, but there are a lot of other aspects to us. There are aspects that cisgender people go through daily, also, such as rape or molestation or abuse when you're an infant, that sort of thing. And a lot of those things really can contribute to the predisposition for suicidal attempts or thoughts or behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, there's a strong correlation between people that have had sexual abuse and people who die by suicide. So that's one that frequently people have trouble getting through. I think that a lot of that has to do with kind of the shame around sex in our society and the way that we can't talk about those issues, really. Like, people hide that and don't talk about it. And I really feel like the secrets are what are killing us a lot of times. The things that we're not allowed to talk about are the things that are contributing to this. One of my criticisms of the overall suicide prevention space is that a lot of times it seems like we treat we're more comfortable calling something a disease than we are calling it a societal problem. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the things that are correlated with suicide, it's basically poverty is correlated with suicide across the board. Mm-hmm. So we're more comfortable talking about mental illness because we don't want to fix those societal problems of poverty. People. It's a similar thing to the war on drugs stuff. We don't want to talk about why would somebody need to, why would somebody need to drink themselves into a stupor? Well, if I were going to sleep on the street in Chicago tonight, I probably would rather do so drunk than sober. That would probably be more pleasant. I'd probably sleep better. Mm-hmm. So it's just, we want to do everything but look at what is the situation that causes that. We want, as a society, we're just not comfortable dealing with those issues directly. And I think there's some politics behind that. And, I think in a lot of ways, the society we live in now is not that different than the feudal system. We have a ruling class that has all the money, and we have a working class that is pretty much has flat wages since 1970, and pretty much every measure of how well we're doing as humans is on the decline in our society. So I think that it's harder to be a trans person, but I don't think everybody else is doing particularly well either right now.
Yeah. I get that. And there's definitely, there are politics involved in that, because like McCrory with this whole House Bill 2 thing where he cap the minimum wage for the state of North Carolina. So in that same aspect, not only is he hurting trans people by denying them bathroom usage, but also hurting trans people by denying them, the ability to make a living wage. And that's just, recircling the, the systems of oppression, poverty, and suicide at that point. So.
Right. I mean, this is not the first time that people on the right have tried to legislate us out of existence. This is the second time. It happened in the 80s. Do you know the history of that? Mm. Yeah, so this is round 2. And, to all the haters out there, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be in the bathroom. You can try to remove me. I'm 6'2" and I was in the military, so good luck. Come at me, bro. Not going anywhere.
Do you think that passing plays any role in suicide attempts or suicide thoughts?
Yeah, yep, yeah. It's much more difficult to be visibly trans, as I call it. I was somebody who just very much didn't pass, and then about a year in, all of a sudden, everything changed for me, and I don't. My hair was still short. It just was, I don't know, something clicked.
Mm-hmm.
Probably something about my mannerisms or something. But in that time when I was visibly trans, I was attacked twice in the Bay Area on a bus. You know, this is like, yeah, I mean, it's
Wow.
difficult to be visibly trans.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's something that we don't talk about in the community that much. But one of the sad things about what's happening right now is we've got all this trans visibility, but it's mostly visibility for like skinny, cis-passing, conventionally attractive trans women. And as somebody that's like a 6'2", tatted up, fat trans woman,
Fluffy.
I got all my tattoos. Yeah.
I love it.
I'm going to show you my bunny rabbit. But so for somebody that doesn't meet that, that's my bunny rabbit Sluggo.
I love it.
That's a mermaid. But for somebody who doesn't fit into that mold, you know, it's a little discouraging, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important that we remember that, you know, I mean, the whole concept of visibly trans is problematic because we have this idea that you can tell who's trans by looking at someone, and you can't.
Mm-hmm.
You might guess correctly, but it's still a guess.
Exactly.
There's an epistemological argument behind that, but you know. Anyway, I'm geeking out a little bit, but guessing right is not the same as knowing, because for it to be knowledge, you have to know, and the reasons that you know have to be the right reasons. If you mistakenly know, like if you think you know, but you're saying, oh, it's because of appearance, well, that's not actually an indicator of trans status, so you're just making a good guess. Anyway.
I like it. Well, thank you so much for coming on with us today. I really do appreciate it. To all of our viewers, make sure to check out the description link for the donation, description for the donation link to Trans Lifeline, and make sure also to take down the number. You'll see that on the screen here for you. That way, if you ever need to call Trans Lifeline, they're always there for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for everything that you're doing for us and with the community and with all of our, you know, suicide issues within the community and personal issues within the community. So, thank you for being there and being, you know, the backbone and support for us.
Oh, thanks.
And thank you to all our viewers out there. Thank you for watching. My name is Jessica Manning with the TSpot Daily for this episode of the T Spotlight, and I am here with Greta Gustava Martela, the co-founder of Trans Lifeline.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.